Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hi, it's Steve and Joe from Fresh Agenda, Everegg's Global Insights team for our very last ever weekly take, Steve.
For those who haven't caught up with this development, we leave Everegg in mid-November after a long time with Fresh Agenda, and we'll be going on to do different things. Let's kick into it.
Our agenda, we've got some brief market updates as usual, a little bit of a talk about Lactalis and Mainland, the sale that was finalised last week, bit of a trade update, some EU production, and of course, chart of the week. So firstly, turning to New Zealand, SGX S&P futures continued to weaken last week, Steve, and obviously that was ahead of the Pulse event, which has only added to the gloom for skim milk powder.
Short term, yeah.
Short term. And in terms of the EU, just looking at these spot prices for cream, butter and milk, cream continued to push a little bit higher, Steve, in the last week. Butter a little bit weaker, but that spot milk price just ticking up again as well, slightly.
A bit at odds with where the general sentiment is. It's short-term push upwards. And there, look at where the futures are viewing things. Futures markets continue to weaken, and there's a nice little rainbow pattern emerging there in week to week. But butter continued to weaken in the EU.
Yeah, and again, Steve, we put up this chart last week. The futures versus recent over-the-counter trades for the corresponding periods that were booked in the last week. Again, not quite down with the weaker sentiment in the futures market, still a little bit higher and much higher in that first quarter of 2026.
Yeah, some different views about value there.
Sure.
The US market is varied, Joe, in spot terms. Butter is tumbling. It's been on a slippery slope for a while. Cheese getting a little firmer, and we'll talk a bit about that later. And non-fat dry milk just drifting sideways still. Quite a mixed bag out of the US.
And sticking with the butter story, just looking at CME butter futures, they continue to plummet, Steve. Spot was down to $2.185 per pound overnight. So just a bit of weakness, not a whole lot of new news, I don't think. The stock numbers weren't outrageous, but just a little bit of a weaker sentiment creeping in there.
Those future milk expectations.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if there's more cheese, that's going to give you more cream, more particularly mozzarella. So that's adding to some of the sentiment, I guess.
Sure.
Turning to Pulse, there was a Pulse overnight.
Yeah, and on it, whole milk powder regular fell by $5 a tonne on the previous Pulse, which was not 2 weeks ago, but 4 weeks ago. It fell by $70 a tonne, or 1.7% on last week's GDT auction. And for skim milk powder, New Zealand medium heat product fell by $140 a tonne, or 4.9% on the prior Pulse, and it was down $45 a tonne, or 1.6% on last week's auction. Arla product lifted by $27 a tonne, or 1% on last week's GDT auction, although we don't have it on the chart, Steve.
It's my confusion. So where does it leave us? That's what it looked like last week when we were talking about skim milk powder. Comparing to this week, EU was a little firmer in the near term, but New Zealand, as you said, lost value further out, Joe.
Yeah, looking at the butterfat comparison we've got last week, and then this week, it's pretty much down in all regions, but with the heaviest falls in the EU.
All right. A little bit about the Fonterra business sale, which was announced late last week. Quite a big event for the Oceania region, particularly the Australian market. The business known as Mainland, it was packaged up to include the consumer business in both Australia and New Zealand, plus also ingredient manufacturing activities and business in Sri Lanka. So it's a real, it's a mix of businesses with which was resolved some time ago to be put on the block either for an IPO or a trade sale, and this is the result.
So Lactalis was successful. The initial price tag that was announced was $3.84 billion. That's in New Zealand dollars. But with the resolution of the issue around the licensing of the Bega brand, that price tag actually went up to $4.2 billion. That was announced just after the initial announcement. And for those who don't know, that's an issue around the licensing of the Bega brand in Australia. That was a bit of a dispute, but now Bega has agreed with Fonterra that there isn't a change of control, and they will, I guess, be negotiating with Lactalis about the way forward from here. It is subject to shareholder and regulatory approval, Steve. Do you think there's going to be any issues with that?
I would think not. There was a pre-approve, as you've noted there, Joe, from the Australian regulator, competition regulator, the ACCC, which looked at this deal. Now, nothing changed in the deal. Whether there's any little nuance about that brand ownership, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
But it is, highly likely this will steam through in New Zealand pretty quickly from shareholders' point of view. There's always been a bit of a question in New Zealand about milk prices between here and over the ditch. This one gets out of the game then, doesn't it? It takes it out as an issue. So that should go away. It should be roundly endorsed, given the payout and given the prospects for how that leaves the Fonterra business overall.
Yeah, and the dividend, I guess, or the windfall for New Zealand farmer shareholders is about $2 a share, Steve. So that's not an inconsiderate amount.
No.
And pretty much at the higher end of expectations, I would have said.
Yeah. It leaves this combined business clearing away the largest milk buyer in Australia, around 2.3 billion litres, and that depends on where this milk collection or competition season ended, which is, sort of kind of ongoing as to who's got what milk. But clearly, bigger than the next two, Bega and Saputo, around about 1.1, 1.2 billion litres each, Joe. Doesn't really change the dynamic very much, given we've had much larger buyers of milk in the past and more consolidation. So the industry has fragmented a lot in recent years, but we're going back to, a larger player with, over 2 billion litres. So it's not foreign territory.
Yeah, I guess the big difference back in time when we had the largest buyer, they were a cooperative, and this is obviously a foreign-owned company. But Lactalis has been in the Australian market for quite some time. And just in terms of the consumer end, Steve, it's quite a boost to Lactalis's branded cheese offering. They had bought a few small cheese businesses and different fresh product businesses around Australia. But this purchase offers Lactalis the number 1 and number 2 cheese brands in Australia. So that's Bega and Perfect Italiano.
And it's the leading food service business. Fonterra in Australia and in other parts had developed an extremely successful food service unit, which also includes China, which is not part of this deal, but certainly the Australian market, it was clearing away the best dairy player in that space with a real solutions focus. So that's a boost as well.
Mm.
All right, interesting deal.
Mm-hmm.
Let's turn to more mundane matters and what's happening in European production.
Yeah, and we've got the June product output figures, Steve, and you can just see in those numbers there much bigger skew towards butter, although not skim milk powder in this latest month. Cheese growth really being managed in line with demand, and whole milk powder, it looks big there, but obviously we're talking very small volumes of whole milk powder. But an interesting trend there, Steve.
And looking at cheese, you can see that on a monthly basis, there's a bit of seasonality in cheese production naturally, and it's changed quite a bit, hasn't it, when you look year to year. So cheese output's being managed now back to reflect demand, and demand's tightened a little bit, got a little bit softer, and exports have also slowed down down 1% in the second quarter just ended. So that's an interesting picture.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at butter, you can see this is the beginning of the story of higher availability. Domestic demand is weaker, exports up a little bit in butter, but certainly, the word out of Europe is we're building stocks, increasing production, but not a lot of clearance into markets occurring. So that's why we saw those prices fall. Global trade, Joe.
Yeah, global trade added up for June was up 3.8% in milk solids equivalent. It's consistent with the trends we saw in Q2 of 3.5% and for the whole of the first half of this year at 3.1%, Steve.
Looking at the commodity view, certainly trade has been stronger year on year in fats, and that's led by some of this activity around tariffs. But the EU27 has been importing quite a bit from lower cost suppliers, particularly AMF. The percentages look very impressive with AMF, but there's not a lot of tons in that.
Mm-hmm.
And also the US, which is taking in a lot more butter, and that's been moving up and down, a bit of a roller coaster with the, won't there be a larger tariff? Cheese has been steadily plugging away. They're strongest into China and the UK markets in that category. bit quite mixed, the commodities, Joe. When you see the little stragglers, they're sort of up and down over the period. Now, our Trade Insights Monthly, which comes out very soon, dives into where the changes have been the strongest across these commodities. And in particular, that story we like to keep rolling with is where the cheese competition is strongest, who's winning. Chart of the week, Joe, where are you going to take us?
Look, for chart of the week, it's an exciting one. We're in the US with American cheese stocks. Just looking at I think we're all looking very carefully at export data and stock data just to see where all this additional production of cheese is going. The year-on-year output is yet to show up in a huge build in stock. So, Steve, obviously that line is going in the opposite direction from last year when stocks were sort of heading downward, but it's keeping the short-term market firmer than perhaps we were expecting with all this extra capacity coming online.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this is the end, Joe. This is our last video. We started this practice in May 2017, which is 8 years ago, more than 8 years. It's a long time, Joe, isn't it? That's actually our age difference, which Joe, I'm sure would have jumped in and said, but I took that. Now, this included in the past we did videos from parks near our office when we had an office out in the burbs, down in Abbotsford, hotel balconies, Harbourside in Auckland. We were all sorts of venues where we did external productions. Those early days were pretty wild, loose, had a lot of bloopers, and hence we quickly had a blooper reel, which incidentally is our highest viewed video, which is a bit sad, really.
It is. So thanks to Jordan Crisanti, who was a marketing intern that came up with the idea for video all those years ago. I was a very reluctant participant at first, but it's been a fantastic practice, especially in the COVID years when we couldn't actually travel and get to see clients and friends. We could at least be with you in video. Nana Stamp-Muller took over from Jordan many years ago at Fresh Agenda. She's done so much editing, so much making us look much better than we actually are at this. Thank you, Nana, for all your work. You're amazing. Paige Driscoll, our colleague from Everag in the digital media marketing area, really upped the professionalism of our stuff. And if you look back, don't look back at the Fresh Agenda channel.
It's
you'll
hilarious.
See the difference. But Paige, thank you for all your efforts in making us look much more professional. And a shout out to Erica Medke and Phil Plaud, who have to sign off on this video every week for Everag.
And haggle with us over whether we need to change charts and fix up formats.
That too.
Also want to thank all the viewers that, Joe, that came up to us at various events where we turned up and gave us the encouragement. We read the views on the YouTube site, and it says there's not many, but when you add up all those people that are apparently watching it, it feels more impressive. Look, this has extended the life of this format because after any of those meetings, I would say, see, there's heaps of people watching this, and so we've kept going. But we've had a lot of fun. It's been tremendous, and thank you for the feedback.
So now, Steve, we're passing the glass of milk to our colleagues, Kathleen Wolfley and Vuko Karov, to continue in this time slot with Chart Chatter. So please give them a look and give them some views, and good luck.
All the best. Thank you.